Hello, everybody, and welcome to the second of the three lectures on John Gay's The Beggar's Opera. Today, we shall take a quick look at how Gay utilizes a hybrid genre of the ballad opera for his particular text. We shall take a close look at how the ballad opera is constituted, how the different innovations within the form are brought in, and then we shall proceed to discuss why Gay chooses such a genre for his Newgate pastoral. Now, the term Newgate pastoral, as many of you will remember, was a term which was used by Jonathan Swift to suggest that Gay write about the lives of the criminals, and through it satirize the criminality in the outside world, especially the political universe of the Prime Minister Walpole. Now, when Gay decided to go ahead, he had two different kinds of generic universes in front of him. What were these universes? On the one hand, he had the very suave, genteel, aristocratic world of the opera, marked by the closed stage, fancy costumes, elaborate tunes, and orchestrated music. On the other hand, the subjects about whom he was writing about, the people, were using bawdy, sleazy songs, very often with erotic undertones. They were using a kind of a popular jazzy ballad music. And very often their exploits would be sung about in broadsides using the indigenous popular tunes of the period. So these were the two kinds of lyrical and musical forms which were available to Gay while he was looking at drafting his Newgate pastoral. How do they go into the making of the Beggar's Opera? This is what we shall take a look at in our lecture. And let me therefore share my screen with you so that you have uh, access to it for a moment. And give me a moment, please. Right. Just give me a moment, please. Right. I'm sorry. Just right. So the ballad opera, for us to undertake any sort of discussion on the ballad opera, it's important to understand why the opera was an important mode of this period. Now, you see, this was the era in which travel to the continent was becoming more and more prominent with the grand tour of Europe. Now, along with the grand tour, as cross continental travel increased due to improved roads, due to more and more trade and commerce, we have the migration of cultural forms. The two of the most important forms which came from Italy, remember, were the masquerade, which was a kind of a costumed dance and became a rage in London, as well as there was a distinct influx of the Italian opera tradition. Now, the Italian opera tradition would include elaborate sets and costumes, and the dialogues would be sung as a recitative. So, even the dialogues would be sung, as it were. So, it was a highly artificial, extremely aristocratic, closed environmental space where the opera functioned. And the subject matter of the opera would very often be, extremely aristocratic themes of the romance and of love, purified, rarefied love. One needs to look at just the operas of Handel, for example, or Tristram and Isolde. So, purified emotions, romantic love, aristocratic characters. The opera was very much a part of the aristocratic repertoire, which was derived from the Italian uh, part of the continent to the rest of Europe, especially England. Now, with the influx of the opera and its popularity across the London playhouses, there was a distinct nationalist backlash to this phenomenon of the opera. There was a degree of resistance against these Italian forms which were sweeping the English stage, especially the urban stage. And therefore, there was quite a number of experimentation and satire on the form of the opera itself. Therefore, the rise of the ballad opera as a kind of a phenomenon. Right. Now, what exactly was the ballad opera trying to do? This is of vital importance for us to sort of study the text. Now, part of my, intention of letting my students see the film version of Beggar's Opera was to see how the music functioned. So, what is Gay doing? Gay is fundamentally taking the popular tunes of the period. So he is taking, songs of the ballad form, popular, erotic, sleazy songs, and suddenly replace them with sweet and sort of sweet lyrics and put them on a high music. So you see, it would be like, a song like Tuninma, where suddenly the lyrics would be made very soft and purified, and the music would then be taken in the form of the operatic tenor. So, what is Gay doing? Gay is taking contemporary sleazy erotic songs. He's also taking certain tunes from the operas, and he is replacing these songs by lyrics which are simple and pure. Right? So, Gay is creating a new theater genre where the popular tunes of the day, witty text, and political, social, and cultural satire was being brought in. So within those tunes, you actually had political references, lyrics, you had political references, you had themes of love. But basically, he was drawing the tune, the music from the popular ballad sources. So, erotic or sleazy tune of the day, and place it with sweet and docile lyrics. What this would do to the audience, which knew those erotic, sleazy songs, would create a kind of a shock that the tune was the same, but the dialogue was suddenly, or the lyrics were suddenly made different. So these tunes were largely, popular, silly, often trivial. but the dialogues were serious, political, or romantic. So there was a disparity. What I'm trying to point out is that there is the disparity between the lightness of the tune, of the music, and the seriousness of the lyrics. And therefore, this would create this kind of a disjunction where the audience would be shocked into a kind of enjoyment of the sleaziness of the and the eroticism of the tune, and the disparity or the seriousness of the lyric. So the character who has the maximum number of songs is, of course, Makith. Now, Makith is identified with the world of the outlaw, with the world of these erotic tunes. But the lyrics that he displays for Polly, or the satire that he makes for Walpole, or the kind of carpe diem themes that he weaves around his songs, would create this kind of a heroism of the character, as well as realizing that he's part of the despicable morals of the period. And in doing so, it would also mock, in a certain way, the Italian the Italian opera tradition. So the ballad opera was also a comment on the intelligent and cultured art form of the Italian opera. The ballad opera shifted the focus from foreign influence and brought back a sense of national art. So what Gay was trying to do is he was trying to indigenize the operatic tradition by adding a whole new range of lyrics and music to it. And in doing so, what he was also doing was he was also undercutting and mocking the Italian opera tradition. Now, there was one crucial innovation that Gay was bringing in, because in the opera, all dialogues were in the form of a recitative in terms of, songs. In the Beggar's opera, there are 69 songs, but the dialogue is in prose, and very hard-hitting political prose, which is juxtaposed with these 69 songs, which were set to lyric by somebody called Pucel, right? And in creating this disjunction between the prose and the songs also, the hard-nosed criminal prose, as it were, prose used by criminals, and this very Hobbesian, self-centered kind of a worldview, versus the songs which suddenly explode into romanticism or satire, once again creates this disjunction. The tone of the prose and the tone of the verses, they are at odds or at loggerheads with each other. So what does Gay do to the opera? First and foremost, the elaborate set is replaced, as you will remember, by the dark background of the Newgate prison. So the romantic castle is replaced by the dungeon-like prison. That's the first innovation in terms of space. The second is that the character, the noble romantic character of the opera, is replaced by the people of Newgate, the charming womanizer outlaw Makith, and his cohorts, including Peachum and Lockett and Jenny Dever. So the rabble of the tavern is suddenly replacing, within the opera form, the cultured aristocratic milieu. The third thing that Gay does is that while the exaggerated music of the opera is maintained, Gay is enlivening this entire musicality through certain very fast, popular, erotic tunes of the period. So, if you take suddenly a Madonna song, for example, and suddenly make it high flown with elaborate operatic music and pep it up with, lyrics, then suddenly, the disjunction between the association of the song and the hybridized format creates a sense of shock when you realize that Gay has inflated and suddenly lionized and made almost heroic the criminal classes and their songs, their popular songs. As it were, the gap or the boundary between the aristocratic and the criminal, the high and the low cultures is suddenly erased, problematized, questioned. In doing so, the ballad opera becomes, as it were, the objective correlative form for showing how high life and low life, as we discussed in our earlier lecture, the aristocratic political life of the 18th century and the criminal life of the 18th century are not separated. The boundaries don't exist. All of them are part of that, uh, as it were, murky, selfish, Hobbesian world view of the 18th century. So, in blurring the generic boundaries, in blurring the musical boundaries, Pope is indicating or creating a world where the political and the criminal boundaries merge, where the gentlemen of the road and the fine gentlemen, the highwaymen and the politicians are seen as similar in terms of their greed and their impulse to rob people. So, in terms of the corruption within society, there's a merger of all classes. Similarly, within the musicality of the period of the ballad opera, there is a merger of two different kinds of genres: the ballad, which is popular, and the opera, which is exclusive. Similarly, the political aristocratic class, which should have been the vanguard of morality, is seen as equally corrupt as the criminal classes. So, this erasure or conflation of boundaries works both in terms of morality as well as in terms of musicality. And this is where lies the importance of Gay's use of the beggars of the ballad opera. You see, Gay could have written a satire in prose. He could have written a satire in a high-flown kind of a lyrical style. But the shock that the audience must have to realize that they and the criminal classes are not different at all is undertaken by this mixture of the ballad and the opera. And therein lies Gay's justification of the use of the hybrid form, right? So it's a kind of a transvaluation, as my PowerPoint suggests, of different kinds of lives in society and different kinds of music in society. Now, apart from this, of course, as I pointed out, there was quite a degree of hostility against the way in which the opera, Italian opera especially, was usurping national forms. So there is a particular kind of satire against the opera itself. So apart from the fact that the ballad opera is an objective correlative of the contemporary political criminal system. There is a degree of satire that is leveled against the opera only. The opera was seen as a highly, artificial form. For example, in the last segment, if you notice, I would have been happy to project that particular piece of text, but I don't have it right now. But if you look at the last scene, where Macheath is suddenly given a reprieve, the beggar says that, this is a very artificial form, the opera, and therefore, strange things, illogical things happen in it. So I can justifiably give Macheath a reprieve here. So this artificiality of the form, its movement away from logic, is something that Gay is satirizing within the Beggar's Opera itself. So there is a considerable hostility against the opera. Secondly, Gay thought that the world of the opera was too rarefied, and real life did not operate in these ways. So on the one hand, he was depicting the grossness of real life, and in satirizing the opera, he was also satirizing the pure and rarefied world of human emotions that the opera tradition generally created. So you can say that Gay is making the opera, or bringing the opera down to reality. Secondly, of course, he felt that, the use of the recitative or the dialogue as music was blatantly unreal, and therefore he disregarded it altogether. Thirdly, he was replacing the world of the Italian opera, of the aristocratic lovers, with bawds, criminals, thieves, and rogues. But there's an important use here. You see, this kind of a coalescence suggests that the nobility is as corrupt as thieves. So this kind of replacement has its own logic, internal logic within Gay. Finally, of course, you remember the scene where, Lucy and Polly engage in a conflict with each other. See, I'm troubled, I'm doubled, I'm troubled, I'm bubbled, and they sort of fight with each other over Macheath. Now, this specific part of the Beggar's Opera has a contemporary reference. In 1727, the two leading, operatic singers, and obviously, because the opera was sung at a high falsetto, women used to sing them, and the lead singer, who had this shrill pitched voice, would be the diva, the prima donna of the opera. So the two major figures on the London stage were Francesca Chiusoni and Faustina Bordoni. Francesca Chiusoni and Faustina Bordoni. So they were tremendous rivals. And in 1727, their rivalry escalated to a fight on the stage, and both of them scratched and pulled each other's hair out on stage. So they were on display, on performance, and they were fighting on stage. Now, this conflict between Lucy and Polly, which is shown on stage over Macheath, could be a direct allusion to this particular incident. So Gay was, mocking these actresses on stage by creating a kind of a similar situation on stage during his Ballad Opera, and therefore he was mocking the Italian opera. So what was the Ballad Opera doing? The Ballad Opera was not only mocking the operatic tradition, but he was also trying to regenerate the indigenous music, the kind of popular English ballad music that was circulating around the country. Gay was trying to give it a new lease of life, rather than accept the artificial mode of the Italian opera. So he was bringing it into the mainstream. The ballad tradition, he was trying to bring it once again into the mainstream cultural discourse of the period rather than sort of relegate it to the margins of popular culture. So this was how the satire against the opera was operating. Now, the functionality, as I have already suggested, is to create one a shock, a kind of a defamiliarization, and then try and look at it through the moral of the opera, as it were, or the social morality of the opera, in showing that, you know, the two classes, the criminal classes and the aristocratic political classes, were not very different at all. So, uh, Howard Erskine Hill, one of the noted critics, suggests that the life of the Beggar's Opera lies in its deployment of contrasting but equally valid and equally questionable modes. So it's not just a mocking of one with the other, but two separate genres are placed by each other's side and shown that the world of the two genres are not so different. So Gay's earlier comedies playfully use different conventions to question and undermine one another. The Beggar's Opera uses different conventions to question and make one another good. So by placing both against each other, Gay was not using one to mock the other. He was rather suggesting that the world of one and the world of the other, the world of the ballad, high aristocratic political, authoritarian, the world, of the opera, and the world of the ballad, popular, low life, low class, were one and the same. So the political satire of the Beggar's Opera largely originates and is sustained by its use of uh, the hybrid genre of the ballad opera. Now, just a few points here, that the opera was comprised of ballads and tunes from popular music. So there were 69 songs, 68 in the original score, with one later added by the third edition in his opera. The most important source was Thomas the Urfey's collection of verses written mostly in folk songs and favorite melodies, 1700, which was called The Wit and Mirth of or Pills to Purge Melancholy. So Gay was selecting the tunes and adding his own lyrics. He also borrowed tunes from his contemporary composers Eccles, Barrett, Purcell, Clark, and Handel. He used tunes from English, Scottish, Irish folk songs. So it was a kind of a British mix. And there were few tunes also from the Italian sources. And the chosen songs included a range of political styles, from jigs to hymn-like tunes. So he was using a wide range of musical forms to suit the situation. It could be, romantic when it came to Macheath and Polly. It could be blatantly satirical when the beggar is using the tune. It could be, philosophical when Peachum and Lady Mrs. Peachum are using these tunes. So Kay was mixing and matching tunes. He was adding his own lyrics. He was creating a medley of tunes within the Beggar's Opera, all suggesting that at every level of people who use these songs were equally corrupt within the Beggar's Opera. So the music in the play is not just merely a kind of an innovation, really. It's not just a kind of a technical marvelousness. It was rather a kind of indicator and a kind of way through which the satire could function. So the music was vital and integral to the satiric function of the text. Now, those of you who have read The Afterlife of Gay will remember that Gay's structure of the ballad opera is going to be used later on once again by Bertolt Brecht in the Threepenny Opera, for example, where again Brecht will use a kind of a defamiliarization and musicality to look at the corruption and decay within modern life in Germany. And the same will be used once again by Ajitesh Bandyopadhyay in the Bengali, ballad opera kind of a form called Teen Poishar Pala, where once again Ajitesh also looks at, through these tunes, the corruption in contemporary Bengal. So we can't say that the ballad opera, this innovative aspect of the ballad opera completely collapsed with Gay. Although one might say that over a period of time, the opera degenerated and the opera was restricted to a very minuscule section of the population. And therefore, the use of the ballad opera tradition, as it were, diminished. But at critical intervals in history, Gay has been revised and revisited. And its use of the ballad opera as a kind of a music that is used by different classes of people, which highlights the similar kinds of corruption at all levels in society, has been a phenomenon that has been used over and over again. So let me quickly sort of fold up what I have talked about today. I have talked about Gay use of the beggars of the ballad opera. I've defined what the ballad opera was trying to do. It was taking popular tunes of the period, replacing these popular tunes with serious lyrics. It might be romantic, satiric, political, and thereby creating a disjunction between the music and the lyrics. It was then setting it to high-flown operatic music and presenting it before the audience without the recitative. We've suggested that there were 69 songs, and there was a potpourri or a mixture of these songs from different sources. And we are suggesting that the kind of disparity between the lyrics and the songs, between the structure of the opera and the constituent parts of the ballad opera, was highlighting the fact that whether it be the society of the ballad, whether it be the society of the opera, aristocratic or criminal, common or high society, it was all marked by significant amounts of corruption. So the ballad opera is not just a technical innovation in Gay, it is critical to the understanding of the text. That was all that I had to say about Gay's use of the ballad opera. In my next discussion, which is tomorrow once again at 10:30, we shall discuss the role of Polly, and we shall take a look at the moral universe of Gay's Beggar's Opera. Meanwhile, thank you for having patiently heard this lecture, and we look forward to your presence once again tomorrow morning. Have a good day.